So for the people that you already have as part of your audience, they're already they're already athletes, right? Maybe they've done a triathlon, they've done whatever they've done, and they're still hungry for more, right? They're approaching 40 or have passed 40, but they feel like they got more in the tank, and they're like I just need somebody who just has got a program, who's skilled enough, talented enough, focused enough, won't buy into my own bullshit about how to optimize my performance, right? Because some people perhaps they find a coach and the coach says, nah, dude, you're like 43, you should just give it up and try, just focus on cardio or something, right? And you're like, nah, we're gonna focus on the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so maybe that's what they're aspiring to do. But I also realize that there are people who are kind of uninformed, right, and uneducated, just blank slates, who if they heard the message of athletic after 40, would be like, oh, that exists, I'm all in, right? Because they just didn't know that that was an option. Why? Because while they're scrolling through Instagram, they're looking at the acrofit guy who's doing like 18 somersaults in 30 seconds, or bouncing off the pull-up bar, right, and doing one of these, and they're like, and they're that disqualifying themselves and feeling like they'll never be there. They just might as well stick to a light regimen of exercises, right? So I feel like after our conversation last week, there was just a lot of different ideas from the format of just the conversation, just generally speaking, to realizing how uncommon it is to have really a conversation about performance and having that be equal to health and wellness, right? Like, and performance from the lens of the athlete, right? The athletic framework. Because I feel like, I mean, if we look at the population, many of us don't feel like we're athletes, right? Like I mean, like maybe we played high school basketballs, right? But we don't like, when I'm training or doing any workout, right? I'm not looking at it through the lens of like the athletic lens. And I feel like that's what you bring, right? You're giving me this sort of like curious invitation to look at what I'm already doing through the lens of performance, right? And performance matters to athletes, right? Um, and in contrast to what we measure ourselves against, which is weight gain or weight loss, right? Aesthetic, these tries are coming in or the tries aren't coming in, right? Which is it the same, which is not the focus of the athletic framework. And what I got from the conversation we had last week was that you can actually still get that if you focus on the athletic framework, right? So the athletic framework takes us into the dimension of becoming virtually invincible, right? Health wise. And it gives us the gains or losses, depending on how you look at it, and the contours that we're looking for in support of our own ego. That's really what it comes down to, right? Like, I hadn't done the research to look up like what's the prime, like top 3 or 5 reasons why people work out. I'm sure looking good, right, is up there. And people will do whatever they can. I mean, from plastic surgery to hiring a trainer, right, to help them just get contoured, get the revenge body, right, and be able to get the job done. So, but full view, looking at like, well, if I really pursue performance with the eye of an athlete, I can have all of that. And not only could I have all of that, I'd actually sort of maybe extend my life another 5 or 7 years, right? Or 10, or however long I could potentially extend it as a function of being in the body of an athlete, right? So I'm recapping sort of like where my mind has gone since our last conversation. Like I've seen, like, being an athlete or thinking from the athletic framework, I'm maybe I can have it all. I can have the body that I want, right? I can have the gains that I want, and I can have the aesthetics and the fitness, and above all, I can have the wellness to give me longevity, right? So
And
I don't know.
even more importantly than longevity, it's more because I feel like longevity is one of these things that we don't have a whole lot of control over.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the saying is you can get hit by a bus tomorrow, right? Like, hopefully nobody gets hit by a bus, but what we do have control over is the quality of our life.
Yeah.
And if we're just chasing aesthetics and we're just doing exercise to target my abs and getting plastic surgery on my calves, that's not necessarily going to enhance the quality of my life from a performance standpoint. Mm-hmm. It might enhance it a little bit on the aesthetic side, but I want it all. I don't want to just look apart and be smoke and mirrors.
Right.
Part of my enjoyment of life as an athlete is being able to go and participate in things that require activity, like physical activity. Like I love being physical. And the people that I'm attracted to and drawn to are also folks who love to be physical and active.
Right.
And then a benefit of that is looking good too. You look great and you have a higher quality of life, because I couldn't even imagine. I know you're kind of like I am, I'm sure, but like you couldn't even imagine not being able to go out for a run or not being able to go do whatever, like whatever it is that you enjoy, whether it's playing a sport, playing with your kids, whatever those things are. If you love living an active life, like the quality is wrapped around your performance, how your body performs, physically.
Yeah. So you're sort of saying also how do you define quality of life? Actually, let me ask that, right? What's your definition of quality of life?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I define the quality of your life for someone who enjoys an active life. So I have to be concise about that, right? Because there are some folks that are just totally fine sitting on a couch, watching TV or doing whatever. And that's great. Like you have to find what's going to be what your happy place is going to be. So, the people that like myself and like you who love to live an active life, when that starts to decline because we don't feel as strong as we used to, we don't feel like we're in as good a shape. Maybe we're dealing with a lot of injuries, like silly injuries, orthopedic stuff that comes up as we get older, and these are all kind of the normal declines of our well-being, our health, our physical capacities as we get older. And we can completely turn those things around. Like, and it's pretty incredible how physically competent you can be in your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, even your 70s. And one of the things that always frustrated me was like, even when I went to college, I got an exercise science degree, right? And even then I remember them saying things about like when people get in their 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s, they're much more fragile. Like they're much more prone to injury. You have to be way more careful with these people because they're like China dolls. Like you hit a 40-year mark and all of a sudden everything turns to glass. Yeah. Right. And some people might feel that way, but all of a sudden, like I get into like human performance and I start coaching all these people, and a lot of them are over 40 and I'm over 40, and I'm seeing like what the true potential is for these guys and girls, quite honestly. Like it's unbelievable what you can do as a 65-year-old guy.
Yeah.
It's like you can be stronger and in better shape than you've ever been in your entire life. Now, obviously, if you were like an Olympian back in your 20s, that's a bold statement. But for somebody who's never really understood how to be the best physical version of themselves, the methodologies, the trainings, all this kind of stuff has gotten so good over the years that we're creating these just badass people.
Wow.
Like imagine the 65-year-old just showing up and just whooping your ass. They're stronger than you, they're faster than you, they can jump higher than you. Like imagine that, right? Imagine that.
Dude, that's freaky. It's like freaky embarrassing. Like a part of me wants to be like, yeah, prove it. And then part of me is like, nah, I don't know if I want to have you prove it at the same time,
Well, one of the biggest tests of fitness, and where there's kind of a lot of the stem from, is the sport of CrossFit. And I know a lot of people probably don't know what CrossFit is. Some people do, but maybe they don't know the extent of it. But the CrossFit is what sort of pushed people into these new levels that we never even imagined were possible, because it's a competitive level sport. So, and then they have these age group divisions, right? So they have guys in their 40s, they have guys in their 50s, they have guys in their 60s. and they all go to the CrossFit Games to compete in all of these different events. And what's really interesting about the CrossFit Games is you have to be prepared for anything. So you don't know what the events are going to be. So you show up for like 4 days of like physical events. You don't know how many events are going to be. You don't know what it's going to entail. You just basically have to show up like ready for anything. Like you could be swimming, running, deadlifting, Olympic lifting, gymnastics. It can be all those combined. You have no idea.
Dude, how
it can be sprints. It can be
isn't
long
it
distance.
like
It can be short
dangerous?
distance. Like you have no idea. So we got these people who are training this broad general fitness, this we call work capacity, right? Just your ability to, your body's ability to do work. And they show up and they can do it all. I mean, it's like they're not masters of any one thing, but they're like really good at everything. It's incredible.
Bizarre. Holy
yeah.
smokes.
And it's really fun watching the masters athletes because they were always put into a category before CrossFit came around. They were always put in a category of fragile, just like the women. And that's a whole nother topic, but like the women have the potential that women have is mind blowing. And they're getting better exponentially in their physical capacities. Their strength numbers are catching up to the guys. And it's coming fast. It's crazy because I think for so many years we put them in a bucket of the weaker sex. We've never given them the opportunity to really grow and evolve into these high performance machines. Now there's these women out there that are just like, I mean, you wouldn't even believe it. So we got the masters athletes, we got the women, we got kids, like teenagers who are performing like you wouldn't even, like all these people that we never would imagine could just be incredible are turning into these amazing athletes.
Wow. So I guess I hadn't considered CrossFit athletes as, I think the way I thought about CrossFit athletes was because I remember when I lived in Chicago, there was like a CrossFit gym around the corner from me, right? And I'd walk by it and see like just the different exercise, kettlebell stuff, and and it was like I figured it was like a exercise routines that involved everything, right? And they'd run around the block, together, right? And that was like a thing, right? So there was almost like this, tribal workout community type vibe to them. And they were just it almost felt like they were always like swelling outward, right? Like there wasn't like any one part of them that was like absolutely like they were just like big everywhere, right? Like and had the flexibility and the mobility of someone who might have been a fraction of their size, right? So they had the strength, they had the physical dimensions, right, that sort of would resemble someone who had that strength in some cases, and then they had the agility, right, of someone who you would easily identify as like being more agile and limber and all of that. So I was never really sort of absolutely clear, other than like they just can do shit. Right? Like they can do stuff. They can, or world's strongest man competition. They can do things with their body and with weight that defy expectation. But it didn't necessarily have like maybe like some objective besides overall health and well-being. I didn't recognize sort of the competitive funnel, right, if you will. I mean, I'm sure some people are just, hey, I'm just a CrossFit athlete because I just think it overall works well with my physiology, right? But I hadn't considered the part that CrossFit gyms sort of have their own sort of micro community that are like training towards these events that you're talking about. So is that sort of the nature of CrossFit, the CrossFit gym network, or like how does it work? Like what's that about? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. So I mean, nowadays the majority of people who go to CrossFit are more general fitness enthusiasts. So they're not interested in competing.
Right.
That's a little bit more of kind of the fringe side of it, but it started off as like a bunch of really competitive people who wanted go to the
Yeah.
CrossFit Games and show their stuff, so you
Yeah.
get ex-professional athletes and all these people would kind of show up, and then there was money in the game. So it was like it kind of started out as more of a hardcore thing. And
Right.
now it's trickled down into general fitness, which is great because
Yeah.
all of those folks are also improving their fitness. So they work
Yeah.
out doing a lot of the same things. We need to improve all of your physical capacities,
Yeah.
right? It's not
Yeah.
just strength. It's not just endurance. It's not just flexibility. It's not just agility. It's not just balance and coordination. We want all of these things,
Mm.
right? So when you go to CrossFit classes and you go to these places, you're going to like performance enhancing places.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're doing all this stuff to make your body as fit and resilient as it can possibly be. So it basically is like when you leave the CrossFit gym, if you've been doing it for a while and you leave, and you go out in everyday life and something comes up in everyday life physically that's a little bit challenging, you're like, this is like nothing. Like if you would have saw what I did this morning, like this, like move some of that mulch to the backyard is like, really? Like it's nothing, So the whole idea,
Awesome.
the concept's the same. We want to improve someone's performance, but the
Yeah.
degrees are a little bit different, right? Not everybody wants to go and win the CrossFit Games. And quite honestly, it's like a professional sport now. Now there's sponsorships and big money, and
Right.
you can't even, you got to be like, you got to be a gifted 1% DNA person to get there.
Wow.
And the other thing is like, there's no weight classes, there's none of that stuff. So, we're not pushing a certain size. It's not better to be bigger, because I think the exercise community as a whole, a lot of times, especially around guys, they think like bigger is better, like bigger muscles, right? We're not interested in bigger muscles. We're interested in performance. We don't care like how big your muscles are. Like if you perform better across the board than someone who's bigger than you, then you're a fitter human being, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're a fitter human being. And sometimes being too big slows you down in other areas. So if you're just a giant dude, like a strongman competitors are specialists. They train to lift only heavy shit.
Yeah.
But you put them against someone to run a mile and they're going to get smoked, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So CrossFit's like the non-specialist. You want all of those things. And the interesting thing about that is we're not chasing a certain aesthetic. When you train that way, when you just train for performance and you train all of these different capacities, your body goes to its most healthful place. And I believe a lot of that is determined just by your DNA. So for example, me, I'm not a big dude. Like naturally, like I'm 160 pounds soaking wet, right? If I want to be 185 pounds, I have to eat like a horse. Like I can do it, but I have to eat like constantly. And like, that's not healthy, right? And if I do that, it also affects my performance. I might get stronger, but I give up a lot of my gymnastic type stuff. I'm not as mobile. I'm not as agile. I'm not as fast. I just don't, you give something up there. So instead, it's kind of like just embracing who you are as a person. Yeah. And what your sort of natural DNA wants you to become. And you allow that to happen by training all of these things. And you turn into your perfect, most helpful self. That's the goal.
All right. So, so the thing is, so you talked about kind of through sort of a CrossFit process, finding your optimal, I don't know, physiological condition, something like that, right? Like you get to find your greatest capacity self, right? And how that's like connected to your DNA. Now, naturally, as soon as I hear that, I get the scientific alarms go off. I'm like, am I like, does somebody know in a lab looking at a blood sample and say, yeah, you know what, this guy, he can only, max out at 185 as far as weight, or, I think there's something deterministic, right? That I hear when I hear someone identifying physical capacity as a function of DNA. But I think you mean something different with respect to, or maybe I'm not, but you can explain or speak more to this. Like, what do you mean by being your highest and best physical self, and how it's connected to your DNA?
Yeah, so when we chase this kind of fitness, right? When we're chasing optimal performance across the board, right? We're not trying to be the strongest person in the world. We're not trying to be the marathon runner, the elite level marathon runner. we want kind of all of these capacities, but we're willing to give up being a specialist, right? When we chase all of these other things, we all have, based on our DNA, like a maximum level, right? Like just based on my physiology and how my muscles are made up. And you can kind of get into the physiology, the nitty gritty of like cellular respiration and all these kinds of things, and how your body processes energy and all these things. Like there are some people who are really, really gifted in those areas that could be amazing marathon runners, right? And then there are some people who just their physiology, their DNA would allow them to be like an unbelievable strength athlete, like a big, strong, huge guy, right? So instead of going just to one of those places, if we trained everything, if we trained both of those things, your body would come up to a high level of its potential, of its genetic potential, right? It would, in both of these areas, if we train both of these things, your physical capacities are not going to hit the full ceiling, but they're going to get pretty damn close, right? Like really, really close, because we're not necessarily specializing in one thing. But then what happens to even your aesthetic, right? How you look, your body goes to its most perfect, healthful place. As far as like body fat goes, how much muscle tissue you have on, right? If you're eating the right foods, if you're training your body across the board, right? You're doing this kind of training, then your aesthetic is going to be perfect for that version of yourself, right? And even that's kind of dictated by your DNA. You know, for me, like I can't be I could be a 250-pound guy, but I would have to eat like a horse. There's a good chance that I'm going to put on a lot of body fat because I have to eat so much, you know, and I might get a little bit stronger, but I'm going to give up some of those other things. And I would argue that in everyday life, we want all of those things, right? We're not training for a specific sport as a guy over the age of 40. At least most of us aren't, right?
Right. Gotcha. So how would you categorize like the kind of training you do, right? Like, is it, because I heard in this conversation, the conversation about the CrossFit, model of fitness. And so if I sort of say pause and then go and think about when someone tells me, oh, I'm a physical trainer, I think, okay, physical trainer, if I sit down with a physical trainer, they're going to ask me a few, maybe they'll take some baseline measurements, right? Like, how much do you weigh? How much do you weigh? Maybe, I don't know if they do anything heart rate stuff or whatever. There's some, how many push-ups can you do? Blah, 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 right? I'm just, thinking out loud. and then they'll say, what are your fitness goals? Okay. And I'll say, I'd like to, bench like I used to bench, 225, 10, 12, reps without breaking a sweat, blah, 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 right? And I know some people are thinking, boy, you used to bench 225 without breaking a sweat. Yeah, I used to bench 225 without breaking a sweat. Okay. I could do it now. I just break a sweat. I just want to do it without breaking a sweat. So I might say something like that, like, some physical metric that I use to reference like my strongest version of myself, right? And I want to be able to squat XYZ, blah, 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 blah. And let's just say they take that all seriously enough and they say, okay, great. How many miles can you run in, 5 minutes? I'm like, I don't know, haven't tried. Right. So there's all these things. And then they would just tailor their workouts to, I guess you could say, essentially feed that, if those goals are egoic goals, right? To feed that, right? To nurture that, to care for that. I mean, that's what I'm paying them to help me do, because I said those are my goals, right? And they, they're there to facilitate me achieving my own physical capacity or physical vision based on that. So let's move it back over to you. If I were to approach and say, hey, I'm going to get, I guess, at first, given you're well branded, right? Athletic after 40. It's like, if you're coming to talk to you, it's like, what part of athletic don't you understand? Right. Right. So if I would have come to you and I say, hey, listen, I've been, talking to different trainers and so on and so forth. Like, what's different about you and what could I expect? Like, what is that? What's that like? Right. Like if I'm coming across and I'm saying, yeah, you're an athletic after 40 guy. What you going to do for me? Right. Instead of like wherever I'm at in my health and wellness goals.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So I think, it's a lot of people, when you ask someone like, what is your fitness goals? Like, what do you always hear? People, because they're
Yeah.
not, they're not like me. They're not thinking about fitness 24 hours a day. Like I live, breathe, sleep this stuff, right? Like human performance is like all, it's crazy.
Right.
So what do they usually go to? Number one is usually aesthetics. I got to lose some weight in my midsection, right?
Right.
And
Right.
that's really not fitness. It can enhance your performance if you're carrying a bunch of extra body fat. But so like I get that. That's cool. You want to lose a little bit of weight. And then they're like, yeah, I want to be able to bench press like I used to in the past. I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. You might write that down on your clipboard. And, and I want to be able to run a mile in 6 minutes or whatever. Okay, so you write that down on your clipboard. You're like, okay, cool. Well, what are your, why did you choose those things? Like, what are your reasons for doing that? And they might be like, well, I remember back when I was 25, I could do 225 pounds 15 times, and like that felt really good.
Mm-hmm.
And like, okay, I get that, but what are we really training for? Like, are we training for any specific event, or is that really all you'd like to do? Is just be able to bench press 225 pounds 15 times?
Yeah.
And then it gets them thinking a little bit more. Like they think a little bit more. I want them to think bigger picture.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what are we actually trying to achieve here?
Yeah.
Is it just to be a champion in the gym laying down on your back?
Yeah.
Because we can do that. That's fine. If that's really legitimately what you want, I'm cool with that. But usually these conversations kind of they turn direction. Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to look a little bit better, and I want to be able to play with my kids, or I'm a hockey player and I want to be able to play better hockey. Yeah. And then it could just be like, well, okay, that makes total sense to me. And as a strength and conditioning coach, maybe the bench press isn't the best thing for us to be doing. Let me just give you an example. Like, and I've got this thing against the bench press. The reason that I have this thing against the bench press is because you're laying on your back.
Yeah.
And this makes me insane. Like the NFL Combine uses a maximum repetition at 225 as one of their strength testing events. Look, if you're a football player and you're laying on your back, you've lost the freaking play. Like you can't be laying down. You have to be up. There are so many better things that we could be doing, right? So anyways, but to give them a broader perspective on like, well, why don't we enhance just the performance of your body? Let's make everything better so that when you do go play hockey, or when you do go play with your kids, or when you do go out biking, or when you do this or this or this or whatever, like you're prepared for everything. And like that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. If you just want to be a power lifter, that's awesome. And I'm probably not your guy then, right? Like I'm into performance as opposed to just a specialty.
Yeah.
Right. Like just a specialist kind of thing. And like the other place that you see this kind of strength conditioning is CrossFit sort of made it popular kind of in the general population, if you will. But where you see it a lot of times is in like Division I colleges. So the athletes go to a gym, and a lot of times they have their own gym, and they go to the gym, and the strength conditioning coaches are training them for performance. They're not just doing bench presses and running miles. They're doing everything because they want those players to have this foundation of fitness that's very broad and general that can lend itself well to all of the stuff that they do. It's not just one thing. It's like they're building the capacities of these kids, which makes them a higher performer on the field or in the pool or whatever it is they're doing. But it also makes their whole body more resistant to injury. Like that's another big thing. When you train for performance, everything kind of builds up together, right? And your risks of silly injuries goes down dramatically. So nowadays, like in the Division I schools, if you're an athlete, like you have to go to the gym. Like you can't even not go to the gym now. It's required.
Yeah.
Well, at least in good programs.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy to think if you're in a Division I school, you're saying all the athletes have to go to the gym, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, how do they become athletes if they can't go to the gym? It kind of comes like, I guess would people opt out of it in the past and sort of want to only play during the games or something? Like, how does that work?
Strength and conditioning as a
You're saying
career.
strength and conditioning. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so fitness, right? Strength conditioning. So the whole kind of thing. Again, it's this bigger picture of the physical capacities of the human body, right?
Yeah.
It's everything. It's not just one thing. It's not just strength. It's not just endurance. It's not just flexibility. It's all we need. All these things to be a high performance human.
Gotcha.
You got to have everything.
So you're saying,
like,
go ahead.
Yeah, and you can so a lot of sports, like before strength conditioning was even a career, a lot of these athletes, like if you go back years and years and you talk to those football players, they had the skill of that sport because they went and they played it every freaking day, right? Like you can become very good at something that you practice all the time. But it wasn't until the strength conditioning world came around and started developing their physical capacities above and beyond even what that sport was asking for. And then all of a sudden everybody's performance went up and people weren't, you could argue the injury rates, there's so many more people that are playing now, but the injury rates even went down at the higher levels of the sport. Yeah. So people weren't blowing out their knees like they used to. They're not blowing out their back like they used to because they're just stronger, more resilient people. So you can have the skill of a sport, and that's going to get you so far. Yeah. You put a whole base of strength and conditioning, right, underneath that, and all of a sudden you start playing better. And your career gets longer. And your injuries go down. Right?
Gotcha. Yeah. So what you're saying is the part of an athlete participating in a routine of strength and conditioning is like a non-option. Like they got to do that, right? Like it's a fundamental requirement of you even being able to play in the sport, whether you want to be a swimmer, whether you're a basketball player, a football player, so on and so forth. That's like, hey, listen, if you want to be a part of this team, you got to go down the track or the route of the strength and conditioning program. Is that right?
Okay. Yeah, you got to build that foundation of fitness, and then even like if I'm like a coach, like let's say I'm a Division I football coach, and you got a multi-million-dollar machine business that's running, right? Like you got to keep these kids healthy, and the season isn't running all the time. There might be some off-season training, but like these kids are going to do stuff outside of football. They're going to go skiing. They're going to do they're going to do all kinds of different things. You want them to be so strong and so resilient that whatever they show up for, they're good. You don't have to worry about them. You want to build this.
I hadn't considered.
You want to build this bulletproof, unbreakable, strong, fit kind of version of these people. You want to build these machines, these high performance machines. Yeah. You give them that base, that lends itself well to any and all physical activities. Yeah. If you've got someone who's got a really solid, base of fitness, like what I'm talking about, like a high performance body that's capable of just about anything. Yeah. It's almost like you can show up to any of those sports teams. You may not be a great player because you have to learn the skill, but you're never going to have to worry about failing because of your condition, right? Like I'm not strong enough, or I can't keep up. You can do that stuff. You might, like I suck at basketball, but I used to be able to, I was better than a lot of people who I played basketball with because I could out hustle and out jump all of them. I was a fucking terrible basketball player. I couldn't dribble. I just didn't have really good coordination. But you know what? I ran faster and jumped higher than everybody.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. But I mean, that's just comes from that, that base of fitness, and you can enhance that. So you get some gifts from your DNA, right? Your DNA might give you some of those gifts, but then you put a base of strength conditioning underneath that thing, and all of a sudden, boom, like you become incredible.
Interesting. So here's something that's kind of interesting, what I'm hearing you say, right? Which is you're in the strength and conditioning lane of coaching, right? And for someone to sort of like put into words so naturally someone could come in and say, I want to bench this, I want to, look like this, look like that. And if you were to sell them, I'm putting quotes, right? Sell them on the idea of strength and conditioning coaching. One of the primary selling points, right? Again, there's nothing to be sold. Look, you either want to, be in peak performance, strength, and condition, or you don't, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is there to buy or sell about that, right? I think it's kind of like a no-brainer. So you're saying, as a strength and conditioning coach, right? Someone comes to you with the case of like an athlete and an aesthetic goal, and then sort of, the egoic goal of like, man, I just want to get back to lifting the way that I used to lift when I was in college. Part of your job is, to some extent, identify whether or not they're the right kind of, candidate for you to work with. That's part of your task. And then secondly, is helping them take a look at those goals that they've set for themselves. Like, are those goals in line with the strength and the conditioning that they really could really benefit from? I was going to say like far more than the aesthetic goals, but it's more like quality of life wise, right?
Yeah.
Like the ability to be injury proof, the ability to participate in all of life, right? And have the stamina, the endurance. So whether you want to go skiing, whether you want to go, skiing, jet skiing, parasailing, skydive, I mean, whatever it is, right?
Bring it on.
You're open to all the different options of life, right? Life's
Yeah.
physical domain.
I don't have to worry about my physical capacities.
Right.
I just got to figure out the skill.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, if someone's already a basketball enthusiast or a ski enthusiast or whatever, they're just all that more strengthened in their capacity to participate in those particular activities, right? And so the selling point is really, all right, well, you can have your aesthetics, you can, do all of that. And if I put myself in your shoes, I'm asking the question like, okay, where does all of that fit into your optimal health and wellness condition, right? And the person may not really have an answer because, like everybody else, right, we're all short-sighted as far as like what we want to look like, right? We see that person who's doing, like I said, the acrofit gymnastic, and I'm like, damn, wow, I could never do that, but I wish I could. And I'm using them as the standard, as the measurement of like what fitness is versus what's my fitness like template or blueprint, right? And if I were to look at that, or consider or be curious or interested in that, I'd say, all right, well, show me what I'm capable of that I didn't even know that I was capable of, right? And that's kind of like a kind of exciting and kind of almost frightening.
As a strength conditioning coach, like if you come to me as an athlete, like this acro guy that you're talking about, I'm not sure who that is, but I'm assuming it's like a gymnast of some sort, right? He's probably doing some gymnastic kind of things. Mm-hmm. And that's great because I've worked with a lot of high level gymnasts, believe it or not, and they come to me and we can sort of make a quick and dirty assessment here now that you kind of understand that strength and conditioning and human performance is not just being a specialist. That's awesome. There's a time and a place for that. Like if you're an athlete, you need to specialize. That's great. Yeah. But when we're talking about broad general fitness, when a gymnast comes in, where are they lacking in their fitness? Where is the chinks in their armor?
Yeah. And how do you assess that? Like, I mean,
just because I've been doing this for so long, but when I say it, you're going to go, oh, of course. But gymnasts are really bad at maneuvering external objects. If I put a barbell on a gymnast and I have them squat their body weight, they crumble.
Interesting.
They crumble much faster than someone who's not a gymnast, who's been doing some of that type of training.
Gotcha. And why is that?
Because they don't practice it, right? They don't do any, and I consider that to be strength. Yeah. Strength is your body's ability to manipulate external objects. Okay. Right? Gymnastics is more of calisthenic type stuff. It's being able to just control and move your body and manipulate your body in space. Both of them, in my mind, as a strength conditioning coach, have equal value.
Right.
So if I can take a gymnast and I can make them stronger by putting a barbell on them, teaching them how to squat and deadlift and press and Olympic lift, if I can teach them those things, all of a sudden they get better at gymnastics.
Interesting. And you've
because they're
noticed
stronger.
so
They're just stronger.
you've seen this happen with clients that you've worked with?
Dude, it works every time, 100% of the time. And if I get a marathon runner, or
Yeah.
no, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, same thing, but I was going to use a different example. But if we bring a marathon runner in,
Right.
he's got a great VO2 max, or she has a great VO2 max, right? But again,
What's
you put a barbell
VO2?
on them.
What's VO2?
It's a measurement of your gas exchange in your body.
Okay.
So you take in oxygen, you exhale carbon dioxide, and you can measure that with some technology that they have, and it'll give you a number. And there's some utility to that as to how efficient as to how efficient your cardiorespiratory system is. So anyway, so they've got great endurance, right? We'll just keep it simple. They've got great endurance. But again, you put a barbell on them and they crumble. They have no strength. But then you make the runner stronger by loading the system. Yeah. And giving them more mobility, because they're notorious for not having good mobility, especially in the lower body. But the only way that you can improve your performance and be able to squat well is to have flexibility as well, right? So you teach them all that. Yeah. And you start getting them with squatting and you make them stronger, and all of a sudden their marathon time goes down by 20 minutes.
And you've seen this happen.
Yes. 5K times. Like whenever you make someone strong, like nobody ever said like, I'm just too strong for this. Like you can never be too strong. And don't get that confused size, because there's a difference between strength and size. When you say strength, everybody automatically goes, oh, you're talking like big jack dudes. Right. And generally size, there is some correlation there. Right. But you can be extremely strong as a smaller dude. I can outlift guys who are 200 plus pounds who are untrained. If they're trained, they'll clean me up, but but if we can make someone stronger, that's always a good thing, And then if you have like the power lifter, the guy who only does bench press, deadlifts and back squats, and you have them show up, and all of a sudden you have them try to do a pull-up. They can't do a freaking pull-up, right? They can deadlift 1,000 pounds, but they can't do a pull-up. What's going on there, right? Like, you got 1,000-pound deadlift and 1,000-pound squat, and you can't do a pull-up. So we teach them how to do a pull-up. And that can translate into some of those other things, right? And we know that they are lacking in their endurance. Their VO2 max is probably very, very low because they don't train more than 5 seconds. Yeah. Right? It's like one maximum effort or a set of 10, which is like 30 seconds, but they never push out past the 1 minute mark, the 2 minute mark. So you start challenging them on that front, and you can make them a better performer with their lifts, because their cardiorespiratory system just gets better. The energy transfer is better. Everything gets better. We want to change the physiology and make you the more foundation, broad, general fitness we give someone, the better they perform in their sport.
Fascinating.
Does that make sense?
Dude. Yeah, it does, man. It's like, and so now I'm thinking, how until you're diagnosed with something, you don't know what specialist to go and see, right? Yeah. So if I'm like a marathon runner and I'm trying to cut my time, I'm going to try to find like a marathon coach, right? If I'm an Ironman person, I'm going to try to find an Ironman coach, right? Like if I was to go on Google, blah 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 blah. So what's someone searching for that leads them to finding you? right? Like, I mean,
this is where I struggle with. Yeah, this is my struggle, right? Like, people associate fitness with aesthetics, right? So it's, that's generally where people find me. But I've got some different skill sets and a different outlook on things because of my experience working in the areas of human performance. Yeah. That's my specialty.
And is it human performance in a particular sport that you started out with, like before you branched out into overall strength and conditioning? Or like how did you broaden out into becoming more strength and conditioning, right? Because I mean, you had some gyms, right, for a time. Yeah. And I'm sure you may have had some, physical trainers, working with you, under you, however, it was set up, and people coming to you and New Year's resolutions, and I want to lose this, and I want to gain that.
Yeah.
Like, did you?
They when I first got my first job was at like a traditional gym. Like you go there, and it was a bunch of general fitness people, but the general training methodology with most gyms, when you walk into most gyms, you got two things. You got the cardio section, and then you get the weight section, right? So you do your cardio first, or your weight, whatever. You do your cardio first or your weights first, but you always separate them, right? They're two different things, right? And the gym that I happen to be at, there was a bunch of semi-pro football guys that used to work out there, and a few of them would work there as trainers, and all they did was bodybuilding all the time. And these dudes were like, they were big and jacked, and they were on steroids, admittedly, like they bragged about it, but they were like massive dudes.
Yeah.
Right. And all they would do was like just isolation stuff, like how much can you bench, sitting down, doing bicep curls, and that's what I did. I didn't do steroids. Not that I was offered it like a million times, but I always said no. But that's what I did. Like I trained with these guys doing all this bodybuilding stuff. And then I ate like a horse. Like I ate everything. And I was like 185, 190 pounds. Like, and if obviously you know me, you've met me. I'm just not naturally a big dude.
Dude, tell me you have photos from that time.
Yeah. But at the same time, like I was fat. It wasn't even like, it was just like, I was just bulky. I wasn't like ripped. I was just big.
Okay.
And like I had a big bench for me, like, but that's all I had. Like I couldn't run a mile, like and I was a swimmer in college, and I lost a lot of that athleticism, right? Training like a bodybuilder.
Right.
So like I could feel it. And then I was just eating all the time, and it was like, I just knew it wasn't healthy. Like I was drinking a lot back then too. So there was some of that stuff going on, but it was kind of a mess. And then I got another job, because I didn't want to do that anymore. It was kind of frustrating and annoying, quite honestly. Like I knew, like I went to college for this, and that's even what they taught me in college. But I'm like, there's got to be more to this. So I got this other job. A guy opened a private personal training studio, and he was a strength conditioning coach from a college, a Division II college that was close by. And I got a job with him, and he kind of opened my eyes to human performance. So that's kind of what tripped it all off. And all of a sudden I saw like, oh, it's not about bodybuilding. Bodybuilding, you take the human body, as you know, and you break it down into a bunch of individual muscle groups, and you work on each of those muscle groups, right? And then I came up with this thing called the one muscle method, but he told me, he's like, you look at the human body as one giant muscle. And that's the muscle that you want to train, and train it in as many ways as you can. Like you want to optimize the performance of that muscle. It's not just single things, it's the whole thing. It's performance. And so now when I would watch athletes, I could see their movements and how their body would just move in space. And it's such an incredible thing, and I started to view it almost like a piece of artwork. Like it's just so beautiful when you watch like a gymnast or even a hockey player, like anybody that's really good at their sport. It's amazing what they can do, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just one muscle. So to dumb the system down and break the body down into a bunch of individual parts and start sitting down is what I consider to be anti-athletic. It's reversing your athleticism. We want to push your athleticism forward, right? So the one muscle method is like, we take a look at the human body as one giant muscle, and that's how we train.
Wow.
That's how we train. Yeah. And I've been a specialist too, because I got into CrossFit, and then a lot of athletes would come to CrossFit because they knew the benefit of the broad general fitness of CrossFit. So I had a bunch of athletes coming in, and then I'm a human movement nerd. Like I'm probably one of the more biomechanical nerds that I've ever run into. It's crazy. Like I obsess over this shit. So I really got into like gymnastics, and I really got into weightlifting. And if you know the sport of weightlifting, it's clean and jerk and snatch. It's in the Olympics, right? You see these guys and these girls lifting like these big giant weights right from the floor. And so I got really into that, and I started competing myself. And then I had some other athletes coming in. I was kind of teaching them. And there's a lot of technique and a lot of nuance involved to be able to lift these really, really big weights. You have to be technically almost perfect. And I really could nerd out on that. There's all and everything has to work together beautifully. Like the whole body has to work really, really well. It's one giant machine, and it's amazing. It's so cool to see what these people can do.
So you started out in sort of the traditional fitness model of isolation muscle training,
and
isolation
then cardio.
training.
Get on the elliptical machine for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
In the fat burning zone.
Oh, gotcha.
Remember that?
Based on the machine and what it tells you that you're.
Yeah, they had the little charts on there.
Yeah. So you went that traditional route, then you branched in. Then you were introduced to the world of you said strength and conditioning, right? Which the
human performance, strength conditioning, kind of the same thing.
Yeah. And then from there you kind of became somewhat of a specialist by focusing on is it called weightlifting?
Weightlifting.
Weightlifting.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, it's interesting. I think people think of weightlifting as synonymous with
just picking stuff up.
Right. And you're talking about weightlifting as like the sport when people like, right. And
so when I weightlifting is a legit sport. Like there's Team USA weightlifting. At the Olympic Training Center, there's USA weightlifting training facility. Like that weightlifting is, when I hear it, and I take it for granted sometimes because I just assume everybody knows what weightlifting is. But you know, like you said, when you say weightlifting, people just think, well, it's anything where you just lift something up, right? Like a dumbbell or whatever.
You're lifting weights.
Yeah, but weightlifting is an actual sport. And then there's powerlifting. Powerlifting is the sport where they do the back squat, the bench press, and the deadlift.
Interesting. Okay.
So there's powerlifting, there's weightlifting, and then there's World's Strongest Man, there's CrossFit.
Right. So crossing from there, after kind of specializing in that arena, you then sort of return almost maybe full circle. Is that what happened after that? Focus on that to the overall strength and conditioning arena as like your focus?
I was always in the strength conditioning, but I had this passion for weightlifting. And then I had some really talented people come to me because I was developing these crazy CrossFit athletes, because just again, like so much of this is how you have to teach people the skills, right? How to do all these things, how to lift heavy stuff, how to run efficiently, how to swim well, how to use gymnastic rings, like how you got to train them on how to do all this stuff. There's so many skills. Wow. So I was like a kid in a candy store. Like I just love that shit, right? Like human movement and the art of human movement. So I could dive into that, and I was developing these crazy athletes. And then I had some other people come in and they're like, hey, you know, I would love to learn some weightlifting. So I started doing weightlifting. So then all of a sudden I had like CrossFit Games athletes that I would like coach at the CrossFit Games that I developed. And then I also had Team USA weightlifting athletes that I developed. As far as I know, and like, I'm going to brag a little bit, but I'm the only coach I know that developed athletes in both of those sports at the highest level. Like there's weightlifting coaches and there's CrossFit coaches, but nobody that I know anyways. Maybe there's somebody out there, but no, there is one other person I know. Yeah. He's out in California. But anyways, yeah. So it's like, I don't know. I just love it so much. It's so fun. And to see, the fascinating thing is to see the capacities of these people that we never thought possible.
Yeah.
We never knew. And I would have argued against, like 20 years ago, if you would have interviewed me and said, you know, you can have a 65-year-old guy that has a, 350-pound deadlift and a 5-minute mile. I'd have been like, there's no way. It's impossible. Wow. And was I wrong? Shit.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well,
and can do 15 strict pull-ups. Like it's crazy. It's nuts.
Yeah. And you've seen the 60 or 65-year-olds who's doing this.
Just like type in, like you can go to YouTube and you can just type in like CrossFit Games. So if you don't believe me, just go there and check out those guys. They're more capable than probably what I'm even saying, but you'll see them doing much more. What's really cool, like again, human performance, we have to measure, right? Like it's one thing, like I asked you the last time we talked, I'm like, who's fit?
Right.
It becomes kind of a subjective thing.
Right.
But in CrossFit, there's like when you go into a competitive CrossFit gym, everybody knows their numbers. Kind of like if you're a business person, everybody knows their numbers, right? Everybody knows their metrics. Right. Same kind of thing in CrossFit. Like you walk into a CrossFit gym and you're like, what's your back squat? They'll tell you. What's your front squat? What's your snatch? What's your clean? How many ring muscle ups can you do? How many pull-ups can you do? How many push-ups can you do? What's your Fran time? So there's even these these workouts that are labeled women's names, Fran and Helen and Grace. Like there's probably 100 of them, maybe probably more.
Yeah.
And they're different combinations of exercises and things. And you can say, what's your Fran time? And they'll tell you 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You know, and this is like the language that we use.
Right.
And the more of these data points we can get from somebody, the bigger, the better the picture is of what their fitness truly is.
Yeah.
So if I'm like, hey man, what's your what's your deadlift? And you tell me 150 pounds, and I say, what's your 5K time? And you're like 16 minutes. Well, I know your strength sucks, but you're a freaking monster on the 5K track.
Right. Right.
So let's get your strength numbers up, because 150 is for an adult male is like,
yeah. So 150, you said, is 150 strength numbers is horrible.
In
Not
a deadlift, good. There's I have minimum standards.
Deadlift is at what, 150 pounds?
So I have minimum standards for all these things only because I've been doing this for so long. So I kind of know, like, I'll just give you an example, like the deadlift. Are you familiar with the deadlift movement?
Yeah.
Yeah. So barbell on the floor, right? Weights on it, walk up to it, set up, stand up. Every guy, every adult male, regardless of age, I don't care how old you are, you can be 100. Every guy needs to be able to lift at least at minimum 200 pounds off the floor.
Okay. And why is that?
It's the base level of strength that you would need, where just about anything else that you're going to do in your everyday life is going to be lower than that threshold.
Gotcha.
Just about. Like if you can lift 200 pounds, you can be pretty confident in whatever comes up in your life. You're good. You're not going. The likelihood of you throwing out your back is going to be pretty low. You know, like you're just strong. Like that's what we want. We want, and if you can lift 200 pounds,
hot take right there.
Yeah.
Why Tony says every man on earth should be able to lift 200 pounds.
Yes. Minimum.
Minimum.
That's like the beginner.
That's hilarious. Okay,
Yeah.
got you. That's fair. All right. I mean, I'm sure I could, and then separate episode or conversation sort of explore how we arrived at that number, but I'm sure it's somewhere about, the average weight of a human being that you'll be surrounded by who happens to fall out that you need to pull over your shoulder or something like that. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I mean, it is a bit of an arbitrary number, right? But it's one that you can, if somebody comes to me who's never done a deadlift before, right? I can train them up pretty quickly, depending on if they've got some old orthopedic injuries or whatever. But for the most part, like a healthy guy comes to me, I can get them doing that in a couple of months, even if they've never lifted a barbell, and safely, like done well, so you don't have to worry about hurting your back. Because there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it, just like any exercise.
Right.
There's a right way and a wrong way. A lot of these, the lifting, the strength stuff with a bar freaks people out because they're like, oh, I used to do deadlifts and I kept hurting my back. The only reason you hurt yourself is because you don't know how to move. You don't know how to perform and organize your musculoskeletal system the right way to be able to perform that lift consistently without any injury. In fact, it makes you more resilient. It makes you stronger so you don't injure yourself.
Wow.
But you have to learn it, and that's kind of where my specialty comes in, is like I've been able to develop all these crazy athletes, and the only way you can develop really high performance athletes is you have to teach them the skills, right? Like you have to teach them how to move their body biomechanically correct, so that, it's the only way you can have an Olympic level weightlifter training with incredibly heavy weights every day without getting hurt.
Wow.
You got to do it well,
Yeah. That's awesome. Awesome stuff, man. So yeah, like I mentioned, before we kick this off, is, having this organic kind of exchange where, the natural questions that I think anyone would have, I naturally have had since our last conversation, that it answers what someone who's watching would have, right? And we, in this conversation, talked about, the frameworks of, it evolved into the CrossFit conversation and the overall strength and conditioning conversation. And, truthfully, so the people who are
interested in performance, like you're talking their language, right? They're like, "Ooh, really? I can improve my fill in the blank by working with this guy," right? Like that's like an easy conversion, right, towards at the athletic after 40 sort of model and framework. And then there's the people who, you know, let's say in my case, I'm physical somewhat, and would kind of wish I would have more time to do more physical things. Like, sure, I wouldn't mind trying, you know, parasailing and jet skiing and swimming, right, and all kinds of things that I just feel like I haven't tested my body's limits or capacities or even confronted my fears around, right? Like, you know, water, when I can't see the bottom of it, I get nervous. You know, I do, man. I'm like, I don't know what's down there, and I don't know how long I can hold on. I can only, I can only doggy paddle as long as I can, like, not scare myself, right, into thinking something's gonna come and grab my ankle and put me underneath, right? So, you know, so I think overall, you know, naturally there are people who are ready with the, oh yeah, here, take my money. Like all I needed to hear was better performance, better results, and I'm there. And I think on the other hand, there are those who are going to start converting into like focusing on their health and conditioning as an alternative to the extreme polarized dynamic of focusing on the aesthetics. And the thing that's kind of like the low-hanging fruit of aesthetics is that you're having that visual sensory response to looking in the mirror, right? Like, wow, look, you know, you know, people are I'm turning him more heads, right? So like there is like some sort of a egoic deficit that's being filled, which is why the low-hanging fruit of aesthetics is so like tempting, right? And beyond just tempting, just so like, okay, yeah, it's like the candy aisle, right? The candy aisle is like, oh my gosh, chocolate, you know, Sour Patch Kids, right? But
it's why the supplements, and I don't remember exactly what the numbers are, but the supplement and the cosmetic surgery industry is, and I'm just going to throw numbers out there because I don't remember what the exact numbers were, but they're like, it's like a $10 billion industry compared to the fitness industry, which is like a $5 billion industry. Because everybody wants that magic pill. They don't want to put in the work. They don't want to, you know, they want to get the fat cut off or sucked out or whatever, you know, and teach their own, whatever. Like that's totally cool that I'm coming at this from a different approach. And if we want aesthetics, that's awesome, because I want aesthetics too. I get it.
Yeah.
But part of the reason I want better aesthetics is so I perform better. Because if I carry a bunch of extra body fat, it's going to affect my performance.
Gotcha.
Right? Like if I got 50 pounds of body fat on me, it's going to slow me down. Yeah. So when we really center everything around just human performance, that becomes really important. So you have to eat better. If you want to perform better, you have to eat better so that you're not carrying around a bunch of extra baggage.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow. Yeah. I could feel even internally as you're describing it, I'm thinking like, it's almost like the sacred cow of like, I can sense like people feeling like they can't have the, you know, given how attached we've all become to the aesthetics, like we've been sold on aesthetics, like from Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Like we've been so 20 years, 30 years, however many years you know, weight training, or I should say muscle man type model, right, has been sold to us. This is almost like a new message, right? A new gospel for fitness and or well-being, is to say like, all right, well, and I guess maybe, you know, the debate could be, well, I'm going to go to the gym and I want to get the revenge body and I want to get it in 6 weeks, right? And so if someone's saying, well, I want to get the revenge body, I want to get it in 6 weeks, and then they compare whatever the equivalent of a performance routine would be over the course of 6 weeks, they might say like, well, which one of these is going to give me more of what I'm looking for? Like, sure, the performance is great, right? But that egoic craving for right? Which is what it just comes down to, because we're all big kids, right? I think to some extent, if I can get, like you said, performance and the aesthetics, I'm in, right? But for sure, the aesthetic sells a lot easier, because like it's that dopamine fix of like being able to look in the mirror and say, oh yeah, look.
And then another thing to really consider on this too, that I think we sometimes overlook, actually probably most people overlook it, but is the longevity of these things. If you're just chasing aesthetics and you do the bariatric surgery, or you do the whatever, you do the the magic pills, or you cut your calories, that's usually the biggest thing, right? We starve ourselves for 6 weeks and we lose a bunch of weight and we look so much better. What is the longevity of those results generally? And there's statistics around this, right? I think it's something like 85% of people who lose 20 pounds or more and gain it back within the next 6 months with more weight, right? So if we can shift the focus, and yes, it requires more work, but with more work, there's more reward. But if you can learn how to develop your human performance, and you learn all these skills and you build your strength and you start eating better, when you start losing that weight, it happens a little bit slower, but human physiology appreciates slow more than it appreciates fast. If you let it change a little bit slower, it's much more likely to stick around. You can still blow yourself up if you stop, but it's just a more sustainable, more healthful, better way of being, right? And I don't think anybody can really, say disagree with that. Maybe some could, but there's something to that, putting in the work, and like doing it the right way, as opposed to just trying to find the quickest solution, the quickest fix, which puts us on these big up and downs through life, right?
And to your point about in pursuit of the aesthetics, part of it, like that being the catalyst sometimes, versus in some cases there are depending on whatever prognosis, right, that someone's got as far as what their options are, but I think it's the psychological switch, right, of embracing that the performance based lifestyle. And I left you a message I think it was yesterday, about this collection of conversations being really like athletic for life. Right.
I call it the athlete life, like living the athlete life. We're not athletes like we were in our 20s,
right?
Maybe. We're playing a much more challenging sport, which is the sport of life.
Well, the sport of life. So like today, you saw the flooring that I picked up, that I right. I mean, like at some point I had those moments, right, between the guy who's the driver that I had working with me to bring the stuff into the house, and when I was carting them. And these things, I don't know, maybe about 5 feet high, right? And they've got whatever density, and I'm pulling it out of the cart, and I'm like, okay, I'm working my lats right now, right? And I'm moving it over, and I'm like laying it down, and there's like 20 something of these pieces, right? And I'm having to lay down. I think of the day-to-day, depending on what it is I'm involved in, activities, and having enough strength, because those situations get a little bit weird and embarrassing when you're like doing something that really shouldn't be, or maybe it's not a common exercise, right, for you to do. And you're like, damn, I'm feeling sore, I'm feeling winded, or I'm feeling, you know what I mean, some type of I'm
really out of shape.
Exactly.
Oh my God, I'm out of shape.
Right. So
I had a client the other day. He's telling me his buddy wanted him to help him. So he bought this safe, right? This personal safe. and he needed to bring it up to his apartment, which was up a couple flights of stairs or something.
Right.
So he calls my client, and my client goes over, and he said that his friend had he had it all figured out. Like he had a little dolly thing there and some straps. And he said he was like explaining to my client, like, so here's what we're gonna do. Like, I think like if we like lift it up and we rotate it and we set it on this thing, and then we do this and this and this. And my client's like, wait, hold on. And he like stopped the guy, grabbed the safe, and walked it up the stairs. And I'm like, there you go. Like, that's real life, right? Like,
Yeah.
You want to screw around with this dolly thing, or are we just going to do this? You know?
Touche. Yeah. There you have, that's the athletic life, right?
Right. Yeah.
Wow. That's the athletic